Hello and welcome to Ventures and Visionaries, Episode 10, Igniting Innovation. I'm your host, Mordy Hackel. I'm an entrepreneur, consultant, coach, and solutioneer, if that is a word. Today's podcast is about entrepreneurship, technology, and business innovation. How can current entrepreneurs create leverage and provide ideas and coaching and inspiration to budding entrepreneurs? This podcast and episode is sponsored by KJ Technology. KJ is a strategic technology advisory and cybersecurity firm. Its primary focus is optimizing and securing technology operations for financial services companies. For more information, please email info@kjtechnology.com. Today, my guest is Catherine Flax. Catherine is a founding member and president of private markets at X Machina Capital Strategies, XMC. It's a fund focused on realizing the future of energy transition. As part of her role as XMC, Catherine is also a board member of Zefiro Methane Corporation and Gradient Geothermal. She's also a board member at Abaxx Technologies, Base Carbon, ISO New England, and Amperon. Catherine, in her past life, served as CEO of PFIN. Did I pronounce that right? PFIN, the world's first artificial intelligence financial advisor at and before that was CEO of Commodities, Foreign Exchange, Emerging Markets at BNP Paribas. Before that, JP Morgan, serving both as Global CMO and CEO for Commodities in EMEA. Currently, she's a board member for a lot of other organizations that focus on making the world a better place. Catherine, we're definitely going to get into that because that is so interesting. And we'll save the exact list because you're going to share those. And you'll also let us know later how exactly we get a hold of these organizations if people want to help and contribute and so on.
Perfect.
In any event, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing great, and I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm really, really glad to be here because based on your bio, your background, and our prior conversation, it really sounds like you are all in on innovation.
Well, thank you. I think that this world is an incredibly interesting place, and there's so much happening in innovation, and I feel really fortunate to have what feels like a front row seat on a lot of wonderful things happening.
It's an unbelievable time. And if you believe some of the forward thinkers, and we're not going to quote them right now, they say that the best time in the history of humanity was to be born in the United States today. I wonder if that's a true statement.
I think only time will tell, but I do think that we are living in some unprecedented times, which brings really great opportunity, but there are also some really big problems to solve. And I think that, necessity is the mother of invention, and I think we're seeing that right now.
Okay, so let's just take a step back and maybe tell us a little bit about more about your background and how did you get into both the world of energy and into the world of innovation?
The world of energy happened a long, long time ago, 30 some years ago. And it was really at that point, I had a fairly in-depth theoretical knowledge of finance and derivatives and things like that. And I was really wanting to find something concrete to apply that theory to. And as it happened, I was living in Oklahoma, which is a big center, obviously, for energy. And I found myself having an opportunity to work on a trading floor focused on first oil and gas and then electricity. And so it was kind of by accident, but also very much met that need for that real life thing. And I just fell in love with energy then. And throughout my career, I've loved the fact that you can almost never get to the bottom of what the issues are in energy. They're always changing, but it's also this incredible confluence of geopolitics, technology, weather, human need, and it's something that you can talk to anyone about, and everyone has some relationship with energy. A fellow who used to work for me once said, you can go a whole lifetime and never interact with an interest rate derivative, but you're probably not going to go an hour without interacting with commodities. And no slam on interest rate derivatives; those are important too. But I love the tangible nature of what we do in energy.
The tangible nature of what we do in energy is a very true statement. And yeah, I don't even know that I can repeat what you said about interest rate derivatives. So, well, as a technologist, I certainly appreciate the fact that, both through energy and the technology of energy, there's been what appears to be an acceleration of innovation that is occurring in the last, maybe a little bit over a decade or so.
Absolutely. And I think that people are becoming increasingly aware of the energy demands that the technological change is driving. It's a bit of a loop, right? The technology changes allow for new forms of electricity or energy in a lot of different ways, but also I think we're facing a tidal wave right now coming at us of energy demand that I'm not sure broadly people are aware of or ready for.
So, in other words, people would think that the greatest demand for energy would be air conditioning for homes and businesses and such, but at least the new AI chips that are now consuming large, whatever that means, amounts of energy is much greater than it used to be. And if that is to have some form of an exponential growth curve, then it would just be worse.
So much worse. And I think there was a thinking maybe even like 5 years ago that the big uptick in demand would be around things like electric cars or so many buildings that are being built now, using electric heat and air conditioning and things like that. And that's really significant. And I think that, a lot of thought has gone into how do we prepare for that? What do we do? And then kind of like what feels relatively quickly, you have this massive step change of the data centers. And what that means to me is that we need all of the above in terms of what kind of energy are we going to deploy. And so we need to think about how are we going to be smart about using everything at our disposal in the best way possible, knowing that we live on this planet. We need to make it in a way that we want to continue or can continue to live on this planet. But we're taxing the existing systems in a very real way.
So this is both on the delivery and the production, or this is something else?
No, it's all of that. I mean, I think the production, where are we going to get the energy from to do all the things that we're saying that we're going to do, but also delivery systems. So, when you think about all of the transmission that's going to need to be built, think about the offshore wind projects, but also that was hearing from somebody recently about new nuclear plants being built in the UK, for instance. All of that is going to require new transmission, not to mention the fact that much of our transmission in this world is pretty old. So we need a lot of transmission upgrades as well. If the entire world is both upgrading and building lots of new transmission, think about the metal that is needed, for instance, for all of that. Like the demands on commodities to make that happen is pretty epic.
And is that really just on the business side, or is that on the residential, or all of the above?
All of the above. All of the above.
So again, you're a finance person and an energy person, so you'd be probably the perfect person to ask this question to. With technologies like the blockchain that I've spoken about quite a bit on this podcast, there is a very strong move towards decentralization.
Yeah.
Is decentralization of production and bringing it closer to the distribution endpoints something that's happening even in the industry, or? It
is happening. I mean, we certainly have seen it, in a big way with solar, right? Rooftop solar has made a big difference in terms of what, even if you look at electricity profiles, they've changed materially because of all of the solar, and that's good. But there needs to be a lot more of it. There's a real push right now to explore and implement distributed nuclear. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how that goes. I don't have an axe to grind personally in that from a business perspective or anything, but I do find it really, really interesting. I think there's a lot of anxiety that people have around how safe is it to have lots of distributed nuclear plants all over the place. So I think that's going to be something both to deal with in reality, but also in perception, because it's hard enough to site a nuclear plant when it's big and has big walls around it and things like that. How hard is it going to be when it's small and everywhere? But really, this problem of distributed generation, which solves a lot of the transmission issues, if it's right there, you don't need to build new transmission lines or big transmission lines. That's a big reason that one of our portfolio companies that we started is Gradient Geothermal. And there's a lot of reasons why I'm very excited about that company, but that particular reason, that distributed generation that Gradient is able to deploy, is critical for where we are today. Definitely part of the solution.
Since you mentioned geothermal technologies, maybe you can explain for those of us, including myself, who, while heard of a couple of friends who put this in their homes, doesn't really understand how this works.
So I will caveat all of this by saying I am no scientist, but I have had the privilege of working with some pretty incredible people who are. And maybe even backing up, what excited me and what the reason that our fund got involved in geothermal is that we were looking at an oil asset that had a lot of hot water at it. We were looking to acquire in the fund. And generally speaking, hot fluids are not a good thing in an oil field. You have to chill them to be able to put the oil where it needs to go and things like that. And so we were looking at this and I was saying, wow, this is a problem. And one of my colleagues who is a physicist said, no, this is an opportunity. So I'm not knowing anything about it, I started Googling hot fluids, in an oil field and what can you do with this? And we came to a company called Transitional Energy, which we eventually acquired, and it's now Gradient Geothermal, that was using the naturally occurring hot fluids in an oil field to generate electricity. And so basically, it's pretty simple. The earth is hot. When you're extracting oil or anything out of the earth, a lot of times, depending on where it is, and how deep you've had to drill or whatever it is, you're getting really hot water, oil, gas, stuff out of the ground. And it's there. I mean, we think about it from, like Iceland, geysers and things like that, but it's really all over the place. It's just a question of how hot and how much. But so we have a huge swath of our country that has a lot of heat in its naturally occurring, the oil fields that the wells have already been drilled. So that's the thesis for Gradient, is rather than drilling new wells, which is really expensive, takes really long time, the permitting and all of that, Gradient is just dealing with what already is. So you already know how much fluid there is coming out of these wells. You already know how hot it is. And then we can put a proprietary unit right there at the wellhead and generate electricity. And so we're doing it now. Cool. It's I love it because it's a waste product, right? So this is something that's already there, and we're just taking it, turning it into something useful, which makes me really happy. That's what I look for in businesses.
So historically speaking, I think they used to burn off the natural gas from oil wells as well in the same way, right?
Absolutely, yes. And we do have a division of our company early on that we were using the flare gas for Bitcoin mining. Price of Bitcoin went down. It wasn't as interesting. I think I wouldn't put it away entirely, because I do think there's opportunities there as well for some of the data center things. But far more interesting, I think, right now is generating electricity.
So do you view that our energy consumption will occur in some other way other than electricity, or is it really for the foreseeable future, it's going to be electricity?
I think for the foreseeable future, it's electricity. I will say that the other interesting thing with the geothermal business is that there is thermal heat, basically, that you can generate as well. So if you have a lot of heat, you can generate electricity. If you don't have as much heat, you may have enough heat to heat your home or things like that. We actually have a phenomenal project right now in the state of Colorado. We have a grant from the state that is public information. It's a field that's owned by Chevron, and the idea is it's a depleted oil field, and you have a small town that's right there. Many of the people who live in the town had worked in the oil field, but now it's kind of a dead asset. And that's the whole idea, is where our whole country and world is sprinkled with this dead or dying assets. What do we do with it? So we have a project now that's a grant to explore turning that field into all the electricity that town needs, but also all the heat that town needs. And so super excited about where that's headed. We're in the design stage right now, but it could be very, very interesting.
And that would obviously be able to be extrapolated for other areas and potentially expanded from there.
Exactly. And we do have other projects that are up and running and generating electricity. We have one in North Dakota that we're really excited about. But now we also have some projects outside the U.S. as well. We have one in the Middle East that we're developing, and one in Argentina that we're developing. There's heat everywhere.
Yes, there is heat certainly on this planet everywhere. So can you maybe just take us a little bit through, and obviously that grant is a very early stage. You said it was the design stage. Yeah. Presumably you need to scale these businesses once you've gotten some form of a proof of concept going into something that's much more of a business. So
That's right.
This is where the entrepreneurial side of, us would be very interested. Can you maybe share some advice or strategies that you've come to lean on in your career to help develop and grow and potentially scale these businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing for sure is looking for an actual need. Now, I'm not suggesting that there aren't businesses out there that, created a need. I mean, one could argue that an iPhone or TikTok or whatever it is, that's not a human need, but they created the need. Good for them. That's not what I do. I look for things where there is an actual need. So in our methane abatement business, you mentioned Zefiro, what we do there is we plug wells that are leaking methane. Methane's a poison. We have literally millions, probably about 4 million wells in this country that are leaking methane. You can plug those wells. They need to be plugged. And then we can generate carbon credits for doing it. So I look for scale that's solving a real problem. So similarly, obviously with the geothermal, we need baseload power. We need it to be clean. We need it to be distributed. That business can do that. So solving real problems at scale. So that to me is really key. Partly because I just think it's stable in terms of like a business model that's needed. But also I just feel like all of us only have so many hours in the day. And so we have to focus on things that I think resonate with us, that matter. And so I feel better about waking up every day and expending my energy on those things that I think are materially going to make the world that I live in better. And I feel like that's what we're doing. So like that to me is the most important thing. So it needs to be scalable. It needs to be a need. There needs to be a path to profitability that is not dependent on who's in the White House, what the regulation is and so on. I mean, you want it to be pretty robust, that it's a profitable business. It stands on its own 2 feet. Like that's super important as well. So those are kind of the fundamental things that I look for.
So, I mean, that obviously is wonderful. And, wouldn't it be great if we were all able to just arrive at that point? I could say that, at least from my conversation with many entrepreneurs, being able to distill it to those ideas is a journey for many people. Is there anything in particular that helped you realize that this is what helps you get up in the morning?
I mean, I think there's a lot of, over a course of a career. I mean, I think that's really a question of like, how do you develop your career? I think that being curious, developing curiosity around topics is critical to that, because being able to spend time thinking about what do I think are interesting problems? What skills do I have that I think I can bring to those problems and all of that? That takes a little bit of reflection and a little bit of, you know, being curious. So I think curiosity is key to that. I think the other thing too is not being afraid to try. When I left banking, I went to Peffin, as you mentioned, and it was not a small decision to leave, decades in banking to go to a startup. And I was talking to a number of people who had done similar journeys, and I spoke with a friend of mine who had done that, and he said to me a couple things that really resonated. One was most startups fail. And so if it's going to ruin your life for the startup to fail, don't do it. Okay, that's a fair point. He also said to me, you have no idea how spoiled you've gotten working in banking all these years. And so you need to recognize that. And so I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, you have assistants, you fly first class or whatever it is. And so I said, well, I don't really care about that. That's fine. But what I realized once I got into the startup is what he really meant was when you're in a big organization, you have tons of resources. So you have a legal question, you go and there's an army of lawyers. You have a marketing question, there's an army of people who do that. Like whatever it is, there's tons of resources. When you're in an early stage company as an entrepreneur, you don't. And so you, on the one hand, can move a lot faster because you don't have all this overhead and bureaucracy. It's kind of you making decisions, or you and your partners. But you're also doing everything. So you're moving a lot slower because of that. And so I think that, knowing what gets you up in the morning around how do you feel about decision making? How do you feel about the buck stopping with you? How do you feel about maybe things will fail? Is that going to ruin your life? All those things I think are really important questions to ask yourself before you go onto an entrepreneurial journey, and being really honest with yourself about those things.
It really seems like self-reflection here is the key, and you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, I think it is.
So, yeah.
I think also having really good partners that you respect and that are honest with you, because we all don't have all the skills. In fact, many of us have very few of the skills. But how do you partner with people who have the skills and that you can build off of each other, I think is also really, really key.
Yeah, it's no question that being able to create leverage both through people and any other resource that you may have at your disposal, particularly when you're dealing with a smaller company, it's key.
It is.
Excuse me. You mentioned that, you mentioned decision making, and you mentioned that in a smaller company, you may be able to make decisions more quickly. That said, the resources in order to make those decisions may be lacking. So is there a process that you've learned to use that'll allow you to make as smart of a decision having imperfect information?
There are a number of really interesting frameworks around decision making that I think are helpful in terms of being clear around who makes the decisions versus who collects the information and how it's distilled and all of that. So I think there's a number of things that I found useful. But I think at the end of the day, what I think limits most people is fear of pulling the trigger. And I do think that for better or worse, I'm not afraid to make a decision. And sometimes it's for the worse. I remember when I took over the business at BNP Paribas, I said to the team, because they had a situation where they were kind of stuck in this limbo. And I'd said to the team, on the one hand, I promise you, I will make decisions. The other thing I will promise you is a fair number of them are not going to be good. So what I rely on is people around me to say, oh, that was not a good one. Here's why. And if you create an environment where people are able to feed that back to you without negative repercussion to them, and that you can then say, okay, cool, I'm going to course correct quickly, then I think you get the best of all situations. Because the reality is, if you're going to be making a lot of decisions, they're not all going to be good. That's just human. That's all of us. Like, that's just the way it is. So getting comfortable with like, yep, that one, that was bad. Okay, let's figure it out. It's okay. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people we have a lot of A students in our midst in the business world, which is very, very good, but also kind of bad, because sometimes it's really hard for people who have always gotten the gold star to be okay with, oh, I screwed that up. But you got to figure out how to get knocked down and get back up enough that it becomes a muscle that you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and funnily enough, I mean, the world is always changing. So long as if one is willing to learn from, let's call it a so-called mistake, if the circumstances were just slightly off, that decision could have been very good. And
absolutely,
yeah, so it's interesting. So I know we're a little bit off topic on innovation, but I think the people is such a key component. And I'm going to ask the question this way. What or how were you able to successfully create a culture or try to create a culture that allows for people to lay down their knee-jerk defensive, and defend their position, even if it's clear that the decision was bad, and just allow people to be more open and seek truth or seek the better collective gain of wisdom?
Well, I think it's a great question, because I do think that at the heart of it, you can't get away from the fact that no matter how technical your business is or whatever it is, it's people, right? That's going to be what you're going to succeed or fail on. And I also think that no matter what we say our culture is or our values are or whatever it is, doesn't matter. What matters is what we do. And I think that you have a real opportunity in every interaction with somebody to reinforce either you tried something, it didn't work out exactly the way you wanted it, but I applaud the fact that you tried. I think if we really applaud the processes that people go through in their decision making, because like you said, sometimes it's just like, it would have been a good decision if it would have been a week later. You know what I mean? Like, you can't necessarily know. So if we really focus on rewarding and congratulating people on the good process that they went through, not the outcome, and vice versa. Like if somebody went through a really bad process and they spun the roulette wheel and they won, we should be cautious about celebrating, right? Because that's not what you don't want them to be, spinning the roulette wheel. So I think that it's a little bit about, again, it goes back to having good partners where we can reinforce this with each other of, let's think about how we're celebrating what people are doing and how they're doing it that gets to the right outcome.
Yeah, and that is absolutely key. And I know that, obviously I've been doing this for, a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit less than you. So the people and coaching the people and building the people makes such a difference in making sure that whatever it is that you're doing, that the people are both feel comfortable doing it, but are challenged at the same time.
And a lot of that too, I think, boils down to what kind of relationships do you have with the people that you're working with? And do you know them? Do you know what drives them? Everybody is not motivated by the same. That was kind of a bit of a revelation early in my career. Like, we're not all motivated by the same thing. That's weird, but we aren't. And so, figuring out, like, what do people care about, knowing them, and then taking the time to listen to people about what is working, what's not working, all of those things. And it sounds, I guess, like touchy-feely, and people will tell you, if they know me, I'm not really a touchy-feely kind of person. But I do think it's really important for people to be heard. And if they're going to be on the team, then they've won the right to be heard. And the best thing you can do is listen to them.
Yeah, and I have to say that I hear you and I agree. And as an entrepreneur, I find it hard as well. It's very, very difficult to truly listen to somebody, as much as it is for people who, historically, I mean, I don't think anybody really listens to anybody anymore. Just look at politics,
It's 100%. And I think it's a good discipline to try to build for all of us, because the world has become these weird, echo chambers and all of that. And I'm happy to report that I do have a wonderful circle of people around me. at work, but also personally, that have wildly divergent views, politically, religiously, everything. And I feel like that's super important, because it becomes very easy to say, well, that's dumb. So that person's dumb. So I don't need to listen to anything that person says. That's ridiculous. That's the world that we seem to be living in right now. And it's just not true. People can have wildly different views, and that doesn't make them stupid.
I often think that the founders of the United States of America understood that. And that was what they had planned by creating the ability to have free speech. It doesn't mean that you can shout down somebody. It means that you're supposed to listen to somebody.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know this is a hard idea for me to digest, but I could be wrong. I know it's like,
well, and the funny thing is that, like, to some extent, we're all sort of type A, possibly overconfident, good at making decisions. Like, that's what we've been rewarded for all along. And so what's implied in all of that is we're right. Right. I mean, you have a whole career of like, I'm right.
It's a fair point.
And so
you're right.
Point. But to say like, oh, wow, maybe I'm not right. Maybe I'm completely wrong about this is really important.
Yeah. So on that note, I'm going to say that I definitely do not have all the answers, and I appreciate the depth of conversation about having an open mind, particularly for people who are running, small, medium businesses, startups, and various other companies. Because at the end of the day, Catherine, I think you said this accurately. Not everybody has all the answers, and nobody can know everything.
Exactly.
So at the same time, the world is transforming at a ridiculously rapid pace. And we've talked a little bit about some of the technologies that you've are dealing with, that you're involved in. Are there any advancements that you're seeing come around the bend that you're excited about?
Well, a lot, actually. And some of it is somewhat micro in the businesses that we're in. But for example, when you look at the technologies that were deployed even 30 years ago in plugging oil and gas wells, it wasn't really that people were malicious necessarily. It's just that they didn't know that, if you plug them badly, then methane leaks into the air, oil seeps into the water table. And so there's been a lot of focus just in recent years about new ways of new things that you can put down hole to make it so that it's properly sealed, so it's not going to leak again. So just things like that. Those are the sorts of things that we're investing a great deal in right now, because these are important things. So these are like tangible, research that people do, and so that's a big focus for us. Likewise, on the geothermal front. We are a company that has a number of patents. We continue to find other important things that we're working on, greater efficiency in how much electricity can be generated and things like that. So I think it's really important to continue to push ourselves on what are better ways to do the things that we're doing. So we're going deep into all of that. So all of that, I think, is just, it's what the responsibility is of being in this business.
Interesting. So it's not, you don't see it just as an opportunity, but it's also shouldering responsibility.
Oh, I think 100%. I mean, I do really think it's important that we all think, whatever business we're in, that we're inhabitants of this world. And so, as you know, I mean, I'm a mom, I'm a grandmother. I mean, I want to make sure that my kids have energy. It's important. My grandkids have energy, but also that they're not living in a Superfund site. I mean, that's all important stuff, and it's what we do, and that to me is very exciting.
Yeah. So maybe at this point would be, since we're talking about being able to pass the torch on to the next generation and making sure that things are cared for intelligently as best we can, as best as we understand it. Maybe you could speak a little bit about the focus on sustainability, and maybe we can even go into some of the organizations that you support in terms of innovation and people.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I think sustainability is a word that we hear a lot. And I think oftentimes it's distilled down to solar panels or, something that's very, very narrow. And again, happy with solar panels, love them a lot. But I think sustainability is so much bigger than that. And I think it has a lot of different dimensions in terms of, if a company isn't profitable, it's not sustainable, number one, right? So there's that aspect of it. If you're not attacking a big enough problem, you're not going to have enough to do to sustain. So there's those sorts of things. But I think there's other important aspects as well. Like when I think about at both Zefiro and Gradient, for instance, we have a lot of people who have historically worked in the oil patch. And those people are in a declining industry. It makes me think a lot about sort of the horse and buggy to car transition. Like what happened to those people that, worked in the horse and buggy industry? Well, we're kind of there in some ways. Not that I think we're going to be having hydrocarbons for the rest of my life, but in specific areas, this is declining very rapidly. And so focusing on how do you create new careers for people who are in that space to be able to take the skills that they have and instead of drilling wells, plugging wells, or instead of, chilling fluids for the purpose of just having it cool enough, do it for the purpose of generating electricity. So it's human being sustainability as well that I think is really, really important. And that excites me a lot. And so to the point around some of the nonprofits that I'm involved in as well, the two that are sort of at the top of my list are Career Spring and Cristo Rey Brooklyn High School. Cristo Rey is a network of 37 high schools around the country. I happen to be on the board of the one in Brooklyn, but they're all great and they're all similar. All these cases, both Cristo Rey and Career Spring, that theme of sustainable human resources is really what underpins all of this. Cristo Rey schools are for significantly low-income kids to get a college prep experience, where what they do is go to school for 4 days a week. So they do 5 days of schoolwork in 4 days, and then on the fifth day, they intern at companies that we all know, Deloitte, JP Morgan, law firms. And so they get this incredible, I wish all high school kids could get the experience that the Cristo Rey kids get, because they get such great insight into what happens in these big companies. They get real skills. It's also a wonderful experience for the people who work in the companies. We hear from people all the time that it's an employee benefit for the employees to work with the Cristo Rey kids because
Really?
it's so absolutely. It's so motivating. And it's really cool. You see these kids, they come in the ninth grade and they're kids. And so we had one young man, and I think he was interning at AT&T. And in his freshman year, he was on the IT help desk. And at that, 14 years old, he was just answering the phones, taking messages. By the time he was a senior, he was meaningfully, solving problems, answering questions, knowing what was going on. What an incredible experience. So I love the Cristo Rey model.
Send him my resume. The other way around, really, but yes.
It's phenomenal. It really, truly is. These are like the most amazing kids in the world. The heart and the amount of work that they have to do to get there is incredible. And I'll tell you, when you go to the high school graduation, there's not a dry eye. Just the support that the kids give each other. It's beautiful. And they go to great colleges and they get full rides, and and importantly, their graduation rates from college are as high as the most privileged kids in our society, which is amazing. So Cristo Rey stays with them all the way through. They get through college, and they're successful. Now, Career Spring builds on that. It was founded by a former Cristo Rey president. And what he wanted to do was create even more opportunity for low-income first-generation college students to be successful in their careers, because what he recognized was that a lot of times to get the best job, there's networking that's involved. It's that social capital that kids have, and that if they're in more privileged circumstances. But even just the awareness of like, well, I like math. I'm a math major. What could I do with that? It really resonates with me so much because my dad had a pizza shop. My mom was a junior high school teacher. They didn't know anything about Wall Street or anything like that, so I couldn't get the advice from my parents like a lot of kids could. And so I see that with the Cristo Rey kids and with the Career Spring kids that, if we can provide, and now there's like 20,000 mentors on the Career Spring platform where, let's say somebody is interested in IT or cybersecurity and you're on there, Mordy, they can go on there and say, hey, Mordy, can I have 30 minutes with you? Tell me about what you love about your career. Tell me about what classes I should take in college, things like that. And so now the Career Spring Network started 4 or 5 years ago. We've got, over 10,000 kids on the platform. They're getting internships. We had a group of interns at XMC this summer from Career Spring. Really, I'm not just saying this. These were like the best interns I've ever had. I mean, these kids were amazing. They're hardworking. They're hungry. It's just fantastic to see. So I love being a part of it because I just get so much out of it.
And you could see the light that's literally shining as you say that. And I will absolutely be happy to share 30 minutes with anybody that would like to speak about IT services, cybersecurity, any of that.
Amazing.
I think that would absolutely be amazing.
Cool.
Because, again, the next generation is really what it's all about.
Well, that's the thing is that we have so much opportunity in this country, but we also need to make use of the human resources that we have. And things are changing so quickly. And so we've got to equip young people with the skills that they need to be successful for what the jobs are that are coming up. That's not always the advice that they're getting with the best of intentions from college, or high school guidance counselors or whatever. They may not know what those next best things are that they should focus on or study or whatever it is. And so to the extent that we who are out here in the world and hiring people can tell those kids, hey, if you can go A or B, you may want to go A because there's more jobs that way or what, we can help that. And the kids are awesome anyway.
Excuse me. Firstly, that's wonderful. It's incredibly heartwarming. Thirdly, I love this because it's such an optimistic story about, rather than, the classic narrative about the young people that are going to be coming into the workforce, blah, 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 and just fill in the blank over there. This really resonates with me because, and this comes directly into bear with what you had said earlier about certain industries that are probably at the tail end of their life. And if you can retool people to be able to use very similar skills for a different opportunity, that can be a very powerful way to both create opportunities for people who may be in the middle of their career or at the tail end of their career, but certainly for the youngsters that are coming in,
yes,
they should understand what they're studying and what the future prospects of that. I think that that's enormously impactful.
And good for all of us, right? It's good for the country.
Yeah. The rising tide raises all ships is a...
It really is. I feel like, both in my work day, but also in like things like the nonprofits, it really does, for me, boil down to the no-brainers. And it really does boil down to things that it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. It doesn't matter, where, if you're, urban or rural, whatever. Things like methane is a poison. If you breathe it, you die. Let's not do that is a no-brainer. Kids need, if a kid's going to college, maybe hook them up with good opportunities. That's a no-brainer. So all of these things are just pretty simple. I'm a simple person, so these are simple things.
Yeah, big problems, but simple solutions tend to solve them much better and more quickly.
Exactly.
Can I ask you, how do you balance your professional responsibilities with all these commitments that you're currently working on?
Well, I would say that there might be some people in my life who would tell you that I'm a workaholic. But I would tell you that I just think that there are so many interesting things to do in this world. And I'm privileged to have the opportunity to work on things that I find very exciting all the time. So while it's true that I do wish that sometimes there were 48 hours in a day, I still think it's great that I never find myself in a situation where I'm like, ugh, I have to do that. Like, my life isn't like that. Like, I'm fortunate that I think I have interesting problems to work on. I love the people that I get to work with. So I just feel like energized by all of that. And I'm probably I'm kind of high energy. I'm a little like bit of a spaz that way. So,
I don't know about that, but it's a blessing. It's a blessing. You're energized, but you're energized because you found what's meaningful for you and what really works.
It really does. And, and I do, I love spending time with my family. My free time passion is cooking. So like, I do have things that I like to do, that kind of use a different part of your brain and all of that. So I do try to create balance in some ways.
What's your favorite dish to make?
Oh, that's a hard one because what I really like to do is try to cook new things. Although I do get, kind of their family favorite request type things, but I do feel like the fun part is like, ooh, finding something new. I've never cooked that before. Let's try that. So that I enjoy.
Nice. I'm famous for my homemade egg rolls.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, if you have a good recipe, please share.
I would be happy to do that.
Awesome.
I don't think we need to bore the rest of the Ventures and Visionaries people with that, but hey, I will happily talk to you afterwards.
Awesome.
It was a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to make. And I agree with you that it has the ability to both be present, but not be as mentally engaged. So it's a totally different experience to be working with your hands.
I totally agree. And I also think that much of what we work on professionally are really long dated projects that are uncertain in their outcome. And I find cooking is so well defined. It's short. You have a product that you deliver, makes people happy. So it's a completely different feedback loop than you get on the normal course of work. But the other thing that I think too is that, in my opinion, I think too much has been made of work-life balance because I kind of feel like it's only life. There's only life. And so how you choose to spend your life is what matters. And making sure you're spending it on things that you care about and that matter to you is important. And I recognize that not everybody can always love what they do for their job. I mean, like my grandmother was a cleaning lady. I mean, but you know what? She found a lot of joy in doing that because that's also a bit of it is how can you find joy in the things that you do, knowing that you're providing for your family and things like that. So there's a bit of mindset in there too.
100%. I mean, the old story about the different people between the bricklayer and the person who was building the cathedral
100%
is, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And there is no question that if you inject meaning into your activities, the activities themselves are elevated. It's not even a question.
It's not a question. And the other thing too, and I think that for me, one of the things that's been super helpful in my career is that I've never really been afraid of kind of getting fired or like losing everything or whatever, because one of my favorite jobs has been waitressing. And I'm like, you know what? I can always waitress. So it'll be fine.
I love that. And by the way, I just want to say that people from, at least for me, again, IT is not often thought of as a customer service business, but KJ Technology is a customer service business. It is first and foremost a customer service business, and therefore the people who are waiters and waitresses, the people who are baristas, the people who had to be at a hotel at the front desk and had to be at the front lines of customer service are exactly the kinds of people that we look for.
I love that. And I often, when I see on a resume that somebody, was a waitress or whatever, I love that. And I was mentoring actually a young lady on the Career Spring platform, and I was just getting to know her and everything. And her family had a restaurant and she worked at the restaurant, but she didn't have that on her resume because she was embarrassed. She felt like, well, nobody's going to care about that. And I was like, well, at least you're meeting one person who would care deeply about that. And I had that same experience, and I know what it takes, to be a kid and work really long hours. And I feel like that kind of work ethic, I value that tremendously, and seeing that on someone's resume demonstrates to me that they probably have a different kind of work ethic. And so I think a little bit of it too is that we need to change the narrative for people, and so that it isn't just, I went to fill in the blank school and got fill in the blank grade point average, but what else do you bring?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Obviously, you're a mom and a grandma, and I'm a dad. And, I look at my kids and they're all very different.
Yeah.
And obviously, you try to extrapolate from certain instances and make a macro observation on the world from, the three people that you know really well.
Right.
Which is in and of itself a bit of a fallacy, and I'll grant you that. I will also say that it's interesting to note that some people are more driven. Some people are more, tell me what to do and I will do it. They will happily do, but it's not like they're actively seeking more things to do on their plate. And different people really have a different approach. And we kind of said this earlier about the differentiations of people. And I don't know that one is necessarily better or worse, but it certainly creates I don't even know if challenge is the right word, but the perspective for people to interact with each other. It's like what it is that motivates you. Are you motivated to serve, or are you a go-getter? Is that what's your personality profile?
Exactly. And I also really strongly believe that there are many different ways to live a life that's successful. And I think that too often we've distilled success into some pretty superficial buckets. And as a parent, anyway, I think it's really important to think more deeply about what does success mean. And it's not necessarily the gold star.
Yeah. So just a couple of final questions, I suppose, as we start to wrap things up. We are a couple of days past a big CrowdStrike bug. It was not a vulnerability. It was a bug, and it took down, I don't know, lots and lots and lots of companies.
Yes.
From an IT and cybersecurity, how do you envision the companies that you work with? How do you see security work in the energy grid? And we've heard all kinds of interesting stories in the paper, and obviously you can't believe a word that you read in the newspapers anymore. So independent of that, from the front lines, what should we be thinking about as people in that space?
I think that we have gotten far, far, far too comfortable as a nation, maybe a world, I don't know, that we're kind of okay. My view, and a little bit informed by, some of the boards that I sit on and things like that, is we really do have a lot at risk, both in terms of energy infrastructure and also financial infrastructure. Both things could be super damaging if really disrupted. And I think that, really, really spending time on what do we need to do differently? I think most of the organizations that I'm involved with are thinking about it, but maybe need to kind of go a little bit deeper in terms of what do we really need. I think two things. What do we need to do to protect ourselves? But also, do we really have the war room plan when the bad thing happens? Because I believe, and you're the expert, you tell me, but it seems to me that none of us can be sure that the bad thing isn't going to happen. We can try really hard to stop the bad thing from happening, but we have to assume that whatever fill in the blank is could happen. And how do we get ahead of that a little bit in terms of what our response is? And I feel like as organizations, we've got work to do.
And so I'll agree with that completely. And I'll say that at least from our perspective, it's not an if, but a when conversation. And you absolutely should be prepared, and potentially even do some drills. And yes, there's a cost to it. And yes, it's annoying. And in certain cases, if you're a financial services company, you may be mandated to actually do it. Other firms that don't have those kind of mandates would be smart to do it.
Yeah.
And thinking a little bit about what it is that one could or should do to make their systems just a touch more resilient. Again, Catherine, you've spoken quite a bit about perpetual improvement and how we think about things today. And if we just spend a couple of extra minutes thinking about it yet again, something may come to us that we did not see yesterday, or someone may say something and we're on Zoom or we're on the Riverside recording platform, so you can't call them water cooler conversations anymore. But the ad hoc conversations that happen that spur an idea that then helps people become just a little bit better.
Yeah.
And that just a little bit better sometimes makes the big difference, because at least from our perspective, security is a layered approach. There's no one panacea. And you saw that very much on Friday, because, everyone moved to the cloud. Everyone thought that the cloud was the smartest thing to do because I don't have to manage my own infrastructure.
Right.
And while that's true, a bug in the system can now take down 2/3 of, the systems in the world, or whatever. I don't know what was called otherwise the largest IT disruption in history. Again, whether you believe the newspapers or not, I'm sure it did. And the last thing that I think that I will say on that front before I wrap on this point is, recovery plans are key. Just thinking about, how will I get back online if, again, here we're talking about electricity. If electricity is disrupted, where do I go and how do I get it? Could be an interesting question.
Absolutely. Super important. And again, goes to the point earlier about this distributed generation and benefits there, because the more you have, distributed nodes, potentially, the more resilient.
So, again, just maybe as a last question on that thought. So if I was planning business continuity workshops, or if we were collaborating on business continuity workshops, we would be thinking as being able to provide distributed energy.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely.
Well, that's certainly a wonderful piece of advice, I would think, for many of our listeners. And Catherine, I certainly am incredibly grateful that you joined me today. I thought this was, firstly, a fascinating conversation. I learned a tremendous amount. Hopefully our listeners too would as well. But as a final word, if people wanted to reach out to you or any of your team in order to be able to work with you, how should they reach out?
Of course, I'm on LinkedIn. They're free to email me as well, cflax@xmcstrategies.com. But I'm pretty easy to find if they Google me.
Thank you, Catherine. This was literally an absolute pleasure, and I'm very, very grateful. And I'm going to wrap up by saying again, and thank you to our sponsor, KJ Technology. KJ Technology provides advisory cybersecurity and proactive process consulting services. For full managed IT services, you can also reach out to KJ if you have any questions, info@kjtechnology.com. Thank you very much, and I appreciate everybody for listening.